They did not come to invade. They did not come to observe or to negotiate or to warn us about anything we were doing wrong. They came to throw something away, and humanity happened to be standing in the disposal zone. The Calyx Assembly's arrival message reached every government on Earth within the same 11 minutes, translated into 400 languages by a system that had clearly been perfecting its grammar for longer than our species had existed. It read in part, "This transfer constitutes a charitable donation of decommissioned materiel, category, disposal. No treaty obligations arise from acceptance. No protection guarantees are implied or extended. The vessel is offered as a gesture of goodwill toward a developing civilization." A developing civilization. That was the phrase that made the UN Secretary-General set down his coffee and not pick it back up. The vessel itself arrived 4 days later, towed into a stable orbit above the equator by a drone the size of a city block, which detached, dipped its running lights once. A gesture someone in the Calyx Assembly's protocol office had clearly decided would read as polite, and left. What it left behind was 700 meters of dull gray hull, orange stripes running the length of it in a pattern that human engineers would later learn meant non-functional, for disassembly only. Someone had scrawled in the elegant looping script of the assembly's trade language a serial number and a single line of disposal metadata. Class, obsolete, value none remaining, recommend planetary recycling. Dr. Threll 9 gave the first public address from a shuttle window 3 orbits later, smiling the particular smile of someone who has rehearsed looking harmless. His English was flawless, unaccented, warmer than it needed to be. "We understand this may seem like a small gesture," he said, "but even scrap metal can teach a young species a great deal. In another few centuries, you might understand engineering the way we do. We hope this helps." There was a silence after that broadcast that lasted through most of a news cycle. Congressional aides reported it. Foreign ministries reported it. It was the silence of a species deciding collectively whether to be insulted or grateful, and for about 6 hours it looked like grateful was going to win because nobody wanted to start a diplomatic incident over a piece of garbage. Dr. Amara Osei did not experience that silence as insult or gratitude. She experienced it as a professional opportunity, and she said so in a room full of people who outranked her. "I want to board it," she said. Amara had spent 19 years modeling propulsion signatures from the handful of assembly ships that had passed through the outer system. Publishing papers that argued the Calyx drive geometry implied a lattice-based reactionless thruster nobody could build with human materials science. She had been called speculative. She had been called, in one memorably unkind peer review, enthusiastic beyond the available evidence. She had kept every one of those reviews in a folder she never opened. "They stripped what they thought was sensitive," she told the room. "Weapons, obviously, command systems, obviously, but they stripped it the way a diplomat strips a briefing document. They took out what looks important. I'm interested in everything else." The boarding party numbered 6, and every one of them had, at some point in their career, been professionally wrong about being right. Dr. Kofi Bonsu had spent 4 years defending a paper on non-crystalline metastable alloys that 2 separate journals had rejected as thermodynamically implausible, before a materials conference finally let him present it to a mostly empty room. Dr. Jinwoo Park, no relation to any other Park, simply the most common surname in the language and an unhelpful coincidence he had stopped correcting people about around age 30, had built a career modeling drive geometries nobody funded. Dr. Priya Nair, a weapons systems analyst the Pentagon had quietly stopped inviting to briefings after she insisted, for the 3rd year running, that assembly targeting computers worked on a principle nobody in the room wanted to hear about. They went in through the aft cargo bay because the assembly had left the doors unlocked, which told Amara more about their confidence than anything in the disposal notice. Bonsu found the wall first. 40 minutes in a service corridor 2 decks down, he stopped walking and put his palm flat against the hull plating and did not move for almost a full minute. "This isn't scrap," he said when he finally spoke. "The molecular lattice is actively organized. It's semi-crystalline at ambient temperature, but the crystal boundaries are oriented deliberately, uniformly, along a single axis." He crouched down slowly, the way a person crouches when their knees have stopped fully cooperating. "This is a self-healing structural alloy. It's not decommissioned, it's dormant." The next discovery belonged to Nair. 3 decks further in a compartment the disposal manifest had labeled sensor array non-functional. She stood in the doorway for nearly 10 seconds before she said anything at all. "They didn't strip the targeting brain," she said. "They stripped the weapons. The computer that used to tell the weapons where to point is still here, and it's still running, and it's still doing the math." She turned around slowly. "This isn't a gun with the bullets taken out. This is a brain with the hands taken off. The hands are the easy part. Park found the drive section last, and he did not speak for almost 90 seconds after he walked in. He sat down on the deck plating because his legs had stopped working the way legs are supposed to work, and put his hands flat against the floor as if he needed to confirm it was real. "They took the reactor," he said eventually. "They didn't take the field geometry. The field geometry is the entire discovery. The reactor is a battery. This," he gestured at the empty housing around him, at the lattice of conduits running through the walls like exposed nerves. "This is 40 years of theoretical propulsion physics sitting here, powered off, waiting for someone to plug in a battery. They don't even need to be that good." He looked up at Amara. "We could build our own reactor to run this in less than a year if we started today." Amara said nothing for a long moment, because she had spent 19 years being told this geometry was impossible. And now it was sitting 11 meters away from her, dormant, patient, and completely real. "Start today," she said. The work that followed consumed 14 months, though nobody working on it experienced it as 14 months. It was experienced by everyone involved as an unbroken sequence of 3 a.m. breakthroughs and 4 a.m. crashes, the strange compressed time of people building something nobody had built before with pieces somebody else had thrown away. Bonsu's team learned to grow the self-healing alloy in small batches within 9 months. Nayer's team reverse-engineered the targeting architecture enough to understand, though not yet replicate, its predictive modeling of gravitational fields. Park's team, the slowest and the most important, spent 11 months building a reactor a fraction as elegant as the one the assembly had removed, one that could nonetheless push enough power through the dormant lattice to wake it. The night the drive activated for the first time, Amara stood in the observation gallery and watched the hull's structural lattice shift color along its length. A slow-traveling wave of pale blue light moving bow to stern, and she thought about the 19 years of rejected papers. And she did not cry, though her hands did not stop shaking for almost an hour. She had told almost no one that her mother had died the previous winter, without ever being told what her daughter actually did for a living, because the classification paperwork had made it impossible to explain. And there had been a night 3 months into the reactor build where Amara had sat alone in a stairwell at 2 in the morning and simply not moved for a while, grieving the specific, unglamorous grief of a person who has finally been proven right and has no one left to tell. 14 months in, the ship, now designated Threshold by a naming committee that had briefly, seriously, considered calling it trash, could move under its own power for the first time in Calyx Assembly design. 19 days after that, the assembly noticed. The communication arrived through the same relay the original disposal notice had used, and it was, once again, flawlessly polite. "It has come to the assembly's attention that the donated materiel has been subject to unauthorized reactivation and modification. This constitutes a material breach of the original transfer terms, notwithstanding the absence of formal treaty obligation. The Assembly requests immediate cessation of all activity and the return of the vessel to inert status within 72 hours. Failure to comply will be interpreted as an act of unilateral escalation." Threll 9 sent a personal follow-up, still smiling, though something in the smile had tightened. "We gave you something we believed you could not use," he said. "We did not expect this level of audacity. I would ask you to consider carefully what you believe you are prepared to defend." Amara watched the message twice and then went back to work, because the deadline did not produce fear in her, only a narrower and more useful kind of focus. 72 hours was not enough time to finish anything they had not already finished. It was, however, precisely enough time to finish the one thing they had not yet dared attempt: powering the ship's own dormant weapons mounts with human-built armaments, small enough to fit the housings the assembly had left empty, crude compared to whatever had been removed, but wired directly into a targeting brain that had spent 4 decades learning exactly how gravitational fields moved. 71 hours and 40 minutes later, 3 assembly cruisers dropped out of transit above the equator. In formation, their running lights steady and unhurried, the confidence of a fleet that had never once needed to fight a developing civilization for anything. The deadline expired at 600 UTC. The cruisers opened fire at 6:01. 32 rail projectiles crossed the gap in the first exchange, and Threshold's targeting brain, designed decades earlier by assembly engineers to track and predict the movement of ships built on assembly principles, read the incoming fire's trajectory correction before the correction had finished happening. The ship rolled 11 degrees. 29 projectiles missed. 3 struck glancing, and the self-healing lattice absorbed the impact and began closing the breach within 4 seconds of contact. Nayer's team had built exactly one weapon system with any real teeth. A set of 12 short-range emitters, crude by assembly standards, aimed with a targeting brain that was not crude at all. She had told Amara back on Earth precisely where to point them, not the hull, the gravitational compensators. That's what they'll never expect us to know exists because they never expected us to keep the part that tells us where it is. The first cruiser lost its compensator array 90 seconds into the engagement and spun, slow and ungainly. Its crew fighting a tumble their own ship had never been designed to survive without that system intact. It did not explode. It simply stopped being a threat, drifting, venting atmosphere in a thin visible plume, and Threshold did not fire on it again. The second cruiser adapted. Its gunnery officer, competent, clearly experienced, clearly not expecting this, shifted to a spread pattern designed to saturate a wider volume of space than any single predictive model could track. For 6 seconds it worked. 2 hits landed. Then Threshold's targeting brain, which had spent 40 years learning gravitational fields and 11 days learning humans, recalculated the spread pattern's own internal logic and closed the gap the pattern had left open, and the second cruiser lost its own compensators 40 seconds later. The third cruiser did not wait to lose anything. It reversed thrust, came about and ran, and Threshold let it go, because Amara had given exactly one instruction before the engagement began. We are not the ones who taught this fight to be about extermination. We don't have to finish teaching that lesson today. The engagement lasted 11 minutes and 40 seconds. Threll 9 official transmission arrived within the hour, and it was, as always, immaculate. It spoke of de-escalation, of formal protest, of the Assembly's right to review the incident through appropriate channels. His personal transmission arrived 4 hours later, and it did not sound like a diplomat at all. There was a long silence before he spoke, long enough that Amara wondered briefly if the message had failed to transmit. "I did not expect this," he said finally. "I want to be precise about what I mean by that because I think precision matters to you, and I have come to believe it should matter to me as well. I did not think a species 400 years behind us in field theory could take a system I considered garbage and turn it into something that could hurt 3 of our ships in under 12 minutes. That was not a failure of your intelligence. It was a failure of mine. I assumed the gap between what we understand and what you understand was a gap you could not cross with what we chose to leave you. That assumption was audacious of me, and it was wrong, and I do not say that easily." He paused again. "We will be in contact regarding the material archive." Amara was already in the material archive by the time the first formal envoy arrived 3 weeks later, because she had spent every one of the intervening nights doing the thing she always did after a private victory, which was to immediately start calculating the size of the next one. The envoy, not Threll 9, someone more senior, someone whose title translated roughly to Steward of Technological Equity, offered with visible reluctance a formal technology-sharing arrangement, framed as a gesture of goodwill rather than a concession, because the Assembly's language did not appear to have a word for concession. Amara did not need the word, she had the numbers. "We reached 40% of your reactionless drive efficiency in 14 months, working from a stripped hull and a targeting brain you thought was worthless," she said. "With full documentation, my team estimates 6 months to reach parity. I'd like to skip the 14 months next time." The envoy did not answer immediately. When it did, it was with the particular careful tone of a species recalibrating, for the first time in a very long while, what a developing civilization actually meant. Amara barely heard the answer. She was already looking past it, at the drive schematic scrolling across the terminal in front of her, at the next problem, the one after the archive, the one nobody in the room had thought to ask about yet. Whether a lattice built to heal itself might also be built, eventually, to grow. She had been thinking about that one since the second month.